Professor, I don't think we need to start the interview by asking which way you'll be voting come the 18th. I think that's all very clear. We've talked to people in business about their feelings and their fears, if you like, about the 18th if a yes vote comes to fruition. From your point of view, from an academic point of view, what are your main concerns should we have a yes vote on the 18th?
My main concerns are scientific research is an obvious one because we do extremely well at the moment in Scotland out of the UK science research system, which is basically the best in the world in terms of banks for buck. You know, the UK delivers better science for the money it spends than any other country would. We're only second to the US in terms of output, but that's because the US spends a lot more money than we do. And we're losing all that. If Scotland votes for independence, it'll walk away from that. And so we lose the benefits which are financial. We get a lot more money than our sort of population share because we have better scientists in a very competitive system, bidding for money in a UK system, and we do extremely well in that competition. And that's one of the essences of science, is it's very competitive. And if we move away from that, we'll become a much smaller enterprise. We'll only be competing with a tenth the number of people that we're competing against at the moment. And there's no prospect that we'll get that additional funding that at the moment comes from the UK. The Scottish Government in its white paper says it would like to continue that, but I think the prospects of that happening are zero for all practical purposes, because I don't think, for a start, I don't think the English taxpayers would wash it. You know, that they would be paying for a lot of research being done in Scotland in a foreign country over and above the sort of research that they have to fund for themselves. So that's from the bodies called the research councils, which are essentially, they're independent of government, but they're funded by government. And of course they have an obligation to basically do research that at the end of the day suits the national objectives, also medical research, for example, cures for cancer and infections and dementia. All those sort of things are the sort of things that we do very well in Scotland because we're in that UK system. There's also probably a problem with the charities as well, the big charities like the Wellcome Trust, Cancer Research, which are UK bodies. And they've made it pretty clear that things would change if Scotland became independent, that Scotland wouldn't have unlimited access to that money, because most of that money is generated in the UK, it's not generated in Scotland. So there are all sorts of issues about funding, also issues about our influence in that system as well, which is very great, that a lot of us in Scotland are on committees in London deciding where the money goes, and that would go as well. So it wouldn't just be the money, it would be the influence in determining science policy, and that would be a big blow to Scottish universities, particularly the top 5 Scottish universities. I mean, the top 5 are in the top 200 world universities.
Why do you think it is, Professor, then, that Scotland consistently punches above its weight in terms of research and in terms of education?
Yes, we've consistently punched above our weight for, well, ever since the Union, basically. And we've worked the system to our advantage, not just by being very good at doing it, but by having people at the top table. And for example, you know, the system we got at the moment, which really started round about 100 years ago, Scots played an absolutely crucial role in setting it up, because they were down in London and other parts of the UK actually working out the system. It wasn't worked out, they didn't set out to say, let's have a system that favours the Scots. They said, let's have a system that favours science. But at the end of the day, they were key players in that, and they still are key players in that. And of course, there's also all the traffic between Scotland and other parts of the UK in terms of scientists moving about. And the examples I like to quote are Joseph Lister, who invented antiseptic surgery, which was a revolutionary change. I mean, he came from England. He came up to Scotland, made his discoveries in Scotland, then he went back to England to tell the English basically how to do it along Scottish lines, in a sense. And then there was Alexander Fleming, of course, who was born in Scotland, went to school in Kilmarnock, then went to England age 16, and eventually went to medical school at St Mary's Hospital, where he discovered penicillin. And so he was a Scot working in England, and that sort of toing and froing has been an integral part of the British science system ever since the 300 years of union. And I wouldn't want to see anything happen to impede that free flow. People just don't think about coming to Scotland, coming to a foreign country, or going from Scotland to England, going to a foreign country. They just go where the science is and where the good universities are.
And there is a massive appeal for international students to come to Scotland and English students. Do you think that would change under independence?
Well, of course, the big issue at the moment is the student fees issue. Scotland, being devolved, has decided, the Scottish Parliament has decided they won't charge fees for university students, and that's a Scottish policy. You don't have to be independent to do that. We've done that already. But what the Scottish Government would propose is that to stop an influx of English students, because the English students at the moment have to pay. If Scotland joins the EU, that would be against the EU rules, that the English students would get the deal that the Scottish students get at the moment. So the expectation would be that they'd come flooding up here because they wouldn't have to pay any fees. I don't know whether that would happen or not, but at the moment the argument is, we'd have a special argument and so on. We'd still charge the English to come up to Scotland, even though that would be against EU regulations. So that's one big issue that sort of festers away at the moment, and I don't think the Scottish Government's idea that it would go to court and win, it might go to court, but I think it would lose because precedent would not be in favour of it. Yes, Scottish universities are very attractive to overseas students, and Scottish universities, in fact, do extremely well. They do extremely well financially, and they also do extremely well in having these very, very clever people coming from all parts of the world to Scotland, adding a lot to Scottish culture and Scottish work and so on, and then going home. Many of them will go home imbued with the sort of principles that they've picked up here, and we in Scotland are very proud of our general way of life and the sort of principles of democracy and all that kind of stuff. So it's got a very, very big influence in world terms, and has had for more than 100 years. People have been coming to Scotland as far as they used to come from America in the 18th century to do medicine in Edinburgh. Nothing much has changed.
You've read and digested the white paper, of course. What was your general overview of the document?
Well, it's a very fat document in terms of the number of pages, but it's very thin in terms of the amount of information as to what would happen after independence. It's been described as the biggest guide and all this kind of stuff, but a lot of it is very critical of what has happened in the past. It's a very negative document. In half of the time it refers to Westminster, it's criticising Westminster. The other half is just saying what happens. And when you actually bore down into it for information, for hard information, it's not there. And for example, the universities get hardly any coverage at all. Science gets even less coverage in the white paper. And these are crucial things for Scotland in the future, because one day the oil will run out, for example. And when that happens, we're going to be even more living on our wits than we are at the moment. We still have to live on our wits now, but it'll be even more important that we have all those people doing really high-tech things, inventing things, developing things, and for that we will need top-class education and top-class science. And the white paper really says rather little about that. It basks in reflecting glory from the past, which of course was under the Union, but it doesn't say very much about how it would improve things in the future. It just said things would go on pretty well much as they are. And I found that very disappointing. It's really a very negative, really poor quality document, I thought, in terms of a guide to the future.
Do you think there's been enough digestible, understandable information that's come from both camps, from both Better Together and from Yes, in order for the electorate to make an informed decision?
I think one of the big problems about having the information, I know people complain they don't have the information, is that how can you actually predict what's going to happen in the future? My favourite quote is that, making predictions is difficult, particularly about the future. And you don't know what's going to happen in the future. And all you can go on is what the proposals are, for example, in the white paper about how things would change. And in fact, very little is said really about how things would change, except that things would stay much as they are. which is not a particularly attractive prospectus for somebody wanting to know how things would, for example, improve their life. From the Better Together, I mean, in a sense, we have the same problem, that all we can say is, well, we can point to things that would be very likely to happen after independence, like, for example, the currency, and what would happen to education, which I've referred to, and things like that. And generally speaking, we don't take a very positive view about them. At the very best, we could say, well, things would go on much as they are at the moment, except there were difficulties about research funding, there were difficulties about Scotland keeping its current position in regards to the EU and things like that. So it is quite difficult to know what's going to happen in the future. I think one of the big issues is that we're much more certain, I think, about what would happen if we vote no than if we vote yes. Because if we vote no, a lot of what has been proposed has already been put into pretty well into the party manifestos for the next general election. So we're pretty confident we'd get more devolution coming to Scotland, and we'd have to raise more of our own money through our taxes, which I think if all the political parties agree would be a good thing. Even the nationalists, we were happy about that. In fact, they're saying that all the money would come from the taxes we raised. The other parties are saying a goodly chunk would come. And so all those are sort of things that would be certain. And you can say that that's certain after voting no. After voting yes, there's so much more uncertainty.
At the time of this recording, we've got about a month and a half to go to D-Day, if you like, and we're interviewing you in your beautiful home here in Aberdeen. And Aberdeen is obviously, and this area, the northeast, is crucial in terms of energy and oil. And we haven't touched on that an awful lot with any of the interviews that we've done so far. But how important is, actually, in your opinion, how important is the energy and the oil debate and the issue to both camps?
Well, I think it is central, and it's been made central over a period of time by both sides in terms of basically trying to predict what will happen in the fairly near future. I think everybody's agreed that, say, within 50 years' time, there will be just a trickle coming out. The bonanza time, in fact, the bonanza time was over about 10 years ago anyway, where the oil was easy to get out, relatively cheap, oil prices were high. That was 10 years ago, and those days have gone, and oil is getting much harder to get out. I think everybody's agreed on that too. And the yes people say, oh, well, all the investment has gone in, so therefore there's going to be another bonanza. I think the correct thing to say is, yes, the investment has gone in because the oil is harder to get out. And that's why you have to spend more to get the same amount. In fact, the amount that's coming out is declining year on year. So, and certainly from my own personal perspective, I can see things are changing, and they're not changing in a very positive way as far as oil is concerned. Okay, we're in Aberdeen, very prosperous. We'll continue to be so because we're quite good at being, inventive in Aberdeen. But my next door neighbour used to work for an oil company. He was Mexican. He stayed here a few years. He's now been posted to Alaska. And 2 doors down, an oil executive, he was made redundant a couple of weeks ago. The oil companies are contracting and looking for other ventures outside of the North Sea because the North Sea is getting more difficult. And so, okay, we know that the North Sea will continue to be pretty good for quite a long time. There will be quite a lot of tax revenue coming out of it, but that's only going to go on for a relatively short time. I don't think it will certainly go on for 50 years.
Do you think that independence worries the oil companies in this part of the world?
Well, I think it does, because they don't like uncertainty and they don't know what would happen after independence. And clearly there are all sorts of issues like that I think do concern them. I mean, they're always looking to obviously make a profit, and they're going to the places where you can do that in the easiest sort of way. The North Sea is getting more and more difficult anyway for geological reasons, and it's getting more difficult it will get more difficult for political reasons as well. So I think they are concerned. I think one of the issues about the whole independence debate, and it's not just in industry but it's in academia as well, a lot of people don't want to put their head above a parapet and say things because in a sense there's quite a bit at stake for them. They don't want to get into bad odour with the current Scottish government, which of course is very much in favour of independence, and I was at a meeting 3 weeks ago where Sir Paul Nurse, who's the head of the Royal Society in London, who's probably, I think you could say, is Britain's most famous and eminent scientist, still working as a scientist, and he was very worried about that particular issue. He has talked to people privately who say, well, you know, we're going to vote no, but publicly they won't come out and say that. And that's an issue, I think, which really does distort the debate a bit, that the people who we know are worried who won't come out and say that.
That takes me on to my next question, because that has been a running theme throughout these interviews we've done in the Northeast. And it's that phrase about putting the head above the parapet for various reasons. But we know that the debate amongst politicians and voters alike is very passionate, could be acrimonious in certain quarters, it could be described as, and is causing, as we know, splits actually sometimes in families. Yes. I mean, do you think that Scotland can recover from this level of bitterness?
It's hard to say what would happen. You know, if no wins, which is of course what I hope, what the yes people will, how they will go on comporting themselves. Okay, many of the sensible ones will say, well, we lost this time and we'll come back in 20 or 30 years' time, because Alex Salmond's on record as saying this is a vote for a generation. No reason to suppose he doesn't mean that. But there will be some people who are so passionate about independence, because it's almost like a religion for them. You know, I hope they don't do anything unwise. I think the no people will just be so pleased they'll just go off and drink some champagne and hope for the best, you know, kind of thing. But the sort of fundamentalist, if you like, and I think some people have called, you know, some of the nationalists fundamentalists, they will be very, very, very unhappy. And I don't think they'll do anything really silly. But I think those divisions will continue. And I know personally people I know who, you know, the two partners feel really, they don't talk about it because they have completely opposite views in the House. And, you know, that won't go away. So, you know, I think we have raised a bit of a spectre.
Do you think that stifles democracy?
Well, it's not good for democracy, I don't think, to have really, I mean, one of the issues about democracy that I think, having been in kind of academic politics for a long time, is that it's all about compromise in the best sense of the word. You may lose something, you may win something, but you don't just trample on the people, for example, who you beat. You've got to come to terms with issues in a diplomatic sort of way, even if sometimes it means just tweaking your principles a little bit, because otherwise we're not civilized. I think that's the mark of civilization, that you have debate, you disagree strongly with people, but at the end of the day, whatever the result is, you then buy into it. And I think that's the way we've worked in Britain, and that's one of the things why I think Britain has been such a success, that we've had this tradition over hundreds of years of doing that. You know, feelings have run really, really high, but forgiveness and compromise is our hallmark. For example, I was brought up in Lancaster, which was invaded by the Scots in 1715 and 1745, and now there's a plaque on the house where Bonnie Prince Charlie stayed, commemorating where he stayed, although the people didn't like it when he was there, when he actually was there. And, you know, that's something I think is typical of the way in Britain we've run things, that we've managed to rise above all these really, really strong issues and come to terms with them and moved on. And I would hope that's what will continue. Can't say that would happen if we vote yes.
Suppose if independence comes about on the 18th, forgive me. Suppose if independence comes about on the 18th, there's also that question about accountability as far as the Scottish Government is concerned. Because, as you quite rightly mentioned to me earlier, it's not like Westminster, where there's the upper house keeping an eye on the worker ants, as it were. It is going to be, you know, it's going to be an interesting scenario, isn't it? And it's about self-policing and how that happens.
Yes, I mean, we haven't really had much guidance on that. We've had the white paper, which said really very little, except that things would pretty well stay as they are. We've had this draft constitution, which is really nothing very much more than a very, very early draft. So we don't really know what, for example, the current Scottish Government has in mind for the future. I'm just disappointed with that. I'd like to have seen something much more concrete about what would be on offer if Scotland votes yes, what would actually be on offer in the fairly, I mean, you can't say what will be offer in 50 years' time, but you can say what will be offer over the next 5 years. We've had so little detail that that's really very disappointing. How can you make your mind up this is going to be a good thing if you don't actually know what you're voting for? So I think that's a great disappointment in terms of the sort of the constitution, if you like. And all that's said is, oh well, we'll have a constitution, we'll have a written constitution, and we'll get all the good will come together and write it and all that kind of stuff. And there are all sorts of issues with that as well, which, whether do we need one, because we've done pretty well in Britain without having had a written constitution. Lots of things are written down, but we don't have 2 pages which says this, that and the other. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in the view that says, well, a written constitution is just a field day for lawyers, because you're constantly arguing about the interpretation of single words and so on. So there are all sorts of issues there which have not been addressed, which I think should have been addressed for what would happen if Scotland votes yes, what would happen in the fairly near future in terms of the sort of government we have that gives actual a really democratic sort of government. And I'm not convinced yet that we've got that sort of level of detail that allows us to say, yes, don't worry about it, everything would be okay in terms of the fairly near future.
Finally, Professor, for those who are watching this who are genuinely undecided, what words do you have for them in order for them to have the confidence to vote no on the 18th?
My words to them would be, Britain has been a great success over 300 years. We haven't always got it right, but we've been a great success. In many ways, we've been a model to other countries in the world. And I would like that to continue. And Britain has done this through evolution and not through revolution. I think for Scotland to break away, it wouldn't be the Scottish Revolution, but it would be revolutionary in its impact. Things would change so drastically and so dramatically. And yet we don't know exactly what those changes would be because we haven't been given the prospectus for it. I would say be much safer, keep the UK going, and use your influence to change the UK. If you're unhappy about things, and most things, we can all identify things we don't like, you can change that. We have a democratic process. You have political parties that you can affiliate to, that you can support or not support, depending on your views, to make change. And I think we're much better together doing that sort of change. That all the issues that, for example, are put out by the yes people in terms of having a fairer society, these should be things that we should be having for the whole of the UK, not just for Scotland. It's a very selfish view, I think, just to say we'll keep the oil and we'll just go on doing our own thing and basically the rest of the UK can lump it. I think that's a very selfish view. I'd like to see all the changes that we're talking about in terms of the debate applying to the whole of the UK and not just to Scotland. So vote no.